Hello, welcome to the second annual WeVideo Creator Community Summit. I'm Krishna Menon, the CEO of WeVideo. We have a packed agenda prepared for you for the next few days with networking, hands-on training, professional development, and more. As WeVideo CEO, I'm thrilled to kick off the event that supports educators. We value you, and as you might be aware, our product strives to support learning in all settings. First on the agenda today, we have the Director of Elementary Education, Equity and Access, Dr. Rosa Perez-Isiah. Our discussion will cover the importance of social emotional learning and why its goal should be equity in education. Without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Rosa Perez-Isiah. Thank you.
Thank you for having me this morning. I am delighted to come to you from beautiful, sunny Southern California. And I will share my screen and let's get started. Let's have a great conversation about social emotional learning for equity. Here we go. Okay. Thank you all for being here. This is wonderful, wonderful. So as mentioned, my name is Rosa Perez-Isiah, and I am coming to you from California. This is the beginning of my 28th year as an educator, and I currently serve in the Norwalk La Mirada School District as Director of 17 elementary schools, equity, and access. So let's have a conversation. SEL for equity, look in the mirror. What is the goal of social emotional learning in education in general if it's not about equity and high levels of learning for every student? And that work is intense work. It is important work, especially now post-pandemic, but it begins with self. And that is why I say, look in the mirrors. That's why I talk about mirror checks, because social emotional learning begins with an analysis of our own beliefs, which impact our behaviors about students, and that is all students. So today we're going to have a chance to look into that a little further, to talk about equity, to talk about the connection between social emotional learning and equity, and what you can do as an educator and educational leader to begin that wave of change wherever you are now. If you'd like to connect with me, I would love to connect with you. You can follow me on Twitter at Rosa Isiah. My hashtag is WeLeadEd. And there's my Gmail if you have any questions that I can answer for you or be of any support to you. So, SEL for equity is really about relationships. And let me share with you a little bit about myself, because I think understanding our stories, understanding the stories of others is a really important part of social emotional learning. Oh, okay, I just got a note saying that you can see my notes, which is not good. So let me pause for just a second. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I apologize. Yeah, I don't know what the difference is, Patrick. But let me try to share one more time. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Let me start there. We just practiced this, I want you to know, and we did not have a problem with sharing. It was great. Okay, let's try this one. Now let me know, Patrick, what that looks like. Okay, awesome. Whatever I did, it works. So here we go. So I want to share with you a little bit about myself because it is powerful. Part of social emotional learning for equity is understanding and building relationships with your students. It's actually the most important part of it all. So I am an immigrant. I came to the United States as a 4-year-old. My parents wanted something better and different for their kids, and really had tremendous courage to leave everything they knew in Mexico and come here for an opportunity. So I am an English learner, grew up in poverty. I am a first-gen student, so first-generation college student, and now currently a doctor in educational leadership for social justice. And why? I've asked myself that a million times, because this is not everyone's story. This hasn't happened for everyone. And I really believe it is the power of connections and relationships that I had with people along the way. And those people were my teachers. I had teachers who valued my language, my culture, who took time to understand who I was, who my parents were, and saw something in me that I didn't know I possessed. So I am living proof that what we do, what you are doing, makes a difference for children, and continue to do this very important work, because I had teachers that, as my friend Dr. Rio says, believe so much in me that they tricked me into believing in myself. And today I am here because of that. So I want to ask you, are you an educator who believes? Our students need self-aware believers. Our students need people in their lives, teachers in their lives, adults in their lives, who work not only on social emotional learning for students, but self-awareness and social emotional learning and wellness for self. Post-pandemic, this is more important than ever. The opportunity to be able to impact students and really target the whole child and the whole community will make a tremendous difference as we return to our new normal. And as an ed leader, something that I am engaging with and with our teams is a focus on social emotional learning as a leverage for equity. And we are beginning that work with ourselves, with looking in the mirror. I'll share more about that as we move along, but we understand that this has been a tremendous year of loss. Not necessarily a lost year, but a year of loss. And we have lost people, we have lost opportunities, we have lost educators. It is really important that we get back to that, addressing the social emotional needs of our entire community. And so I appreciate the focus on the whole child. We also need to have a focus on the whole community. Our entire community needs to be part of this work so that we can heal and we can reach high levels of success, not only for our students, but our educators as well. This is our current reality right now. And equity, I truly believe, is part of everything we do in education. That is the lens that I use, that I believe all should use. Because if we don't have equitable learning opportunities, then are we truly educating our children? And so we have to look at inequity, racism, bias, and all of those pieces that impact the learning of our students. And here are some facts that we're dealing with right now. The majority of educators are white educators, about 82%, and about 76% are female. The majority of students in our districts are not. The majority of our students are students of color, language learners. So there's a discrepancy there, right? And it's been like that as long as I can remember. It was like that when I was a child. That doesn't mean that white educators cannot support and work with students of color. Of course not. I don't want you to walk away with that. But there is research about the impact. That means that we have to work a little harder to understand who our students are, especially if you're working with diverse communities. We have systemic racism. There is plenty of data out there about systemic racism. Along with that comes the dehumanizing of students of color. And we see that in our discipline policies. We see that along and across a number of systems, including our educational settings. The political climate of the last few years have brought things to the surface, things that exist, things that have been in place, inequities and injustice, and of course the pandemic. If anything, with the pandemic, I realize that it has put a spotlight on this many issues that our communities have faced. And I almost feel like it took the pandemic to help people understand the lives of some of our students and the hardships that some of our students and communities face, and the impact of poverty, and helping people understand that our students and families were doing the best that they could. Dr. Bettina Love, who wrote an incredible book, said, it took a pandemic. Why did it take a pandemic? Well, it did, and we're here. And I am delighted to know that we not only are addressing some of those inequities, but we're doing it through this work of social emotional learning for all. And in a nutshell, what this has created are many opportunity gaps, achievement gaps, if you want to call them that, but opportunity gaps. So that's a state of the union, in my opinion, and where we are. So what does that result in? It results in, again, some data for you. Let me share with you a few points. Latinos continue to lag behind other groups when it comes to earning a bachelor's degree. In 2012, 14% of Latinos between the ages of 25 and older have earned a degree. By contrast, 51% of Asians, 34% of whites, and 21% of African Americans had earned bachelor's degrees. Our students with disabilities are twice as likely to be suspended from school as those students without disabilities. High school dropouts are 63 times more likely to be incarcerated. And we can look a little deeper and see how many of those that are incarcerated have learning gaps, have learning disabilities, and other things happening. And the average test scores of Black students are 2 grade levels lower than those of white students in the same district. The Hispanic-white difference is roughly 1.5 grade levels, and that is some data from Stanford 2016. I would be happy to share some of those points with you. So that, at the end of the day, that is the long-term impact of inequity and systemic racism on our communities. If you know social emotional learning, you probably know Dr. Dina Simmons' work. And in 2018, she worked on a report applying an equity lens to social, emotional, and academic development. And in her research, she identified, I believe it was 5 barriers that prevented marginalized youth, students of color, from developing some social and emotional competencies, from growing in those competencies. And I chose to highlight on one here. Of course, there's inequity. Adult beliefs and behaviors are the hardest to change, and bias. And I want to share with you that with bias, we all have bias, every one of us. And it could be connected to racism. A majority of the time it is. But bias is, I like to think of it like shoes. We all have them for different reasons. And in my next slide, I'll share a little bit more with you about bias and what that means. But highlighting the problem of implicit bias in education in no way aims to demonize educators. And I want to make that very clear, but rather to highlight this very important and critical growth that has to be addressed so that we can guarantee that health and life outcomes for all students are great outcomes. If we don't talk about it, we can't change it. And I know that these conversations can be challenging, but I would like to call them critical conversations, not necessarily crucial conversations or courageous conversations. They're just conversations that have to happen. So let's dig into bias and what I mean when I talk about bias. Let's develop some self-awareness, right? We have implicit bias, which is something that I'm seeing more and more people talk about, and that is all about attitudes and stereotypes, and again, could be positive or negative, unconscious and involuntary. And that can look like, when I say positive, because that just sounds odd, right? What is a positive bias? What I mean is that it could benefit a group or it could hurt a group. So if we tend to call more on boys when we have a computer science lesson, that is a bias, our bias, whether we're aware that we're doing that or not, that is impacting everyone in that classroom. So the boys are being impacted positively because they're getting that reinforcement, those opportunities to engage and to share their ideas and explore ideas, while maybe you're not calling so much on girls. They're not having those opportunities to engage in those ways. So that's what I mean when I say that bias can impact students positively or negatively. And again, it could be the way we were raised. It could be cultural. I know for me, those are pieces that I've dealt with, addressing my own bias and belief as a Latina young woman, and understanding how it was impacting my teaching. Because whether we want to admit it or not, acknowledge it or not, this impacts what we do in the classroom. Our biases impact our teaching and our leading. Explicit, I don't believe we have the time, space, or energy to tolerate explicit bias in any system. And those are attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that are negative, that are conscious, that are racist, and that are intentional and controllable. And so those are the differences between implicit and explicit. Now, equity, what do I mean when I talk about equity? It's very simple for me. It is about giving every individual, student or staff, exactly what they need to be successful. Giving a human being what they need to be successful. And that can look different for everyone. There has been a lot of talk and conversation about equity these past couple of years, but we've got to move past that learning and building capacity, which I am thrilled about, into doing. So how are we doing equity? Please remember, equity is a verb. It is ever evolving. It is a journey. It never stops. It is something that we have to keep working on consistently, continuously. SEL for equity. Social and emotional learning is a process through which our students, kids, and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge, attitudes, skills necessary to manage their emotions, to set and achieve positive goals, to feel and accept empathy, to establish and maintain healthy, positive relationships, and to make responsible decisions. And that is via CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. That is the definition of social emotional learning. And social emotional learning can help us address inequity, and it can help us empower students and adults to create incredible learning communities that thrive and that contribute to being safe and to being healthy and to create just communities. I don't know about you, but seeing students in classrooms brought me to tears after the pandemic. And hearing stories, the stories of our teachers and the stories of our students, really reminded me about the importance of our work. So it was just very natural to be able to combine these two pieces. I don't know that we could truly foster social emotional learning and support our students if we don't acknowledge that we have inequity in our lives. And so if we truly want to get to that place of healing for everyone, we've got to put these two together and be able to address them together. And the good news is that it begins with self, with our own self-awareness. And I think back to teaching early in my career. It was all about fixing students. And it was almost like what I thought was really an afterthought. What I felt, what I knew was beside the point. It was about fixing students because they, in my mind, came in with a lot of needs, and my job was to solve them. My job was to get them the support they needed and to fill them with knowledge. And that was more of a savior mentality. And it's a gray area, but really our students don't need us to save them. Our students don't need saviors. They need caring adults who understand their needs. They need great instruction. They need opportunities. They need second, third, and fourth chances, and they need resources. And they need caring adults who understand inequity and who work daily to create this culture of safety and high expectations and success for learning. So when we connect these together, it is really the catalyst. It's what we need to launch us into those high levels of learning, which ultimately is the goal. When we feel safe, when we feel comfortable, it is that Bloom's and Maslow working together to ultimately reach our goal, which is high levels of learning for our students. Okay, so I love this image by Teacher to Teacher. Why SEL and equity? Social emotional learning, forces us to look in the mirror and become self-aware, right? Because we're understanding our emotions and our beliefs and where we stand. Equity combats injustice, inequity, and implicit bias. Then self-awareness and equity eliminate those barriers and provide access. And it provides access and justice and liberation, because we've all seen these images with students and these barriers to the event or the ball game. But really, why not dismantle those barriers? We want to get rid of them altogether and get to liberation. And I think that piece of self for equity creates this type of environment where we can start dismantling and we can create a liberated group of individuals and learners. So I love this image. And I know we are running out of time, so I'm going to move us into social emotional self-awareness, promoting equity through SEL. So through the specific nuances, I love this quote, of bias may vary from student to student. Experiencing bias can be especially damaging to marginalized students, and it can negatively impact self-concept, mental health, and identity development. And what do I mean, or who am I addressing when I say marginalized students? Students in poverty, students of color, historically underserved students, students with disabilities. So bias can be in your face, it can be very subtle, but remembering that those pieces are especially damaging to groups of students who are already marginalized is an important part for us as educators. So first thing is looking in the mirror. What are your beliefs, your mindsets, and your behaviors? Determining equity for students really begins with self. So do you recognize your bias? Do you recognize your privilege? Take a moment to do that. If it means sitting quietly, if it means video recording a lesson, if it means having some heart-to-heart conversations with colleagues, because there are things about us that we may not see. We don't know what we don't know. And you may mean well in the way you are interacting with students, but you can't do something about it until you are aware. So that is the important piece of self-awareness and mirror checks. And if you're asking yourself, well, where do I begin? Ask yourself, do you truly believe that all students can learn? Do you believe that students in poverty can learn? That English learners can learn? Do you believe that there is injustice in education, even if it doesn't affect you? Even if you were not impacted by it? Do you believe that systemic racism or inequity exists? Start with the data. Look at your students. Look at your student achievement levels. Look at your attendance levels. Look at your suspension levels. Who are the kids that are always in the office and why? Do you have relationships and mentorships in your school with groups of students? Do you have authentic, genuine, vulnerable, real connections with your students? Those are all part of the mirror check that as educators we have to tap into. And creating the conditions, using SEL as a path for equity is, we need collective commitments from our educators. We need to establish our non-negotiables. If you are an ed leader, if you are a leader of your classroom, think about what you will accept, what you are letting go, what you are choosing to ignore. Relationships, relationships, relationships. I can't stop saying that enough. Understanding that, yes, it takes change and courage, beginning with yourself and committing to changing something that you feel you can do better. Make data-informed decisions. If it's hard to bring people along, you can't argue with data. That is how I did things as a teacher. That is how I did things as a principal and now as a director. is we leverage our data because the data tells a story, and it tells a story of success. It also tells a story of inequity. So tap into your data to understand who your community is. And today, commit to something that will change in your classroom, in your school, as an educator, as a leader. Commit to stronger relationships and positive classroom climates. Our students are coming back and they need a safe place. They need a place where they can connect and feel accepted and appreciated. Social emotional learning is amazing, but it is not enough. It begins with understanding self. It begins with connecting and honoring the lived experiences of our students. It begins with embracing the whole child, and that includes race and language and culture. SEL with equity is enough. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you, and I apologize I went over 2 minutes. Let me stop sharing right there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rosa, for that enlightening talk. We truly value all the ways you support students. Next up, we have some networking tables and a bunch of amazing teacher-led sessions. Also, don't forget, be sure to tune into our Party with Flipgrid at the end of the day, too. Thank you.
Thank you.